Hello everyone and welcome to today's Cambridge University Press ELT webinar. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome back as today's presenter Deirdre Safers. Deirdre is a teacher trainer who's been involved in teaching and teacher development for the last 14 years and has taught English in 7 countries over the course of her career. She has an MA in online and distance education and has used blended learning with both students and teachers. She now works with teachers and institutions to help them get the best out of teaching and learning online. Over to you, Deirdre.
Hi, Alistair. Can everyone hear me? Thank you. Thanks for coming, everyone. I'm really excited to be able to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is designing online task design. Designing online task design? No, designing online tasks. So mostly we're looking at communications, and in the poll I've asked, do you have experience of designing communicative online tasks? And 85% of people have said, oh, it's changing. Okay, so we've got 9 people who have done a little bit, but a lot of people who haven't. So those of you who've answered yes, if you could add your information as we go along, if you've got experience that is different from mine, or if you have extra ideas that everyone can benefit from, then please do put them in the chat box as well. So basically, what the reason that we need to talk about these kinds of things is because people are very experienced teachers, and we all know how to create a communicative task that we can do in the classroom, but moving that into an online environment is not always as simple as it seems. So in general, we're trying to achieve the same things. We want our students to communicate with each other and with us so that we can see how well they manage the language, how skilled they are at getting their ideas across. So that's the same online or offline. It's exactly the same set of objectives, but when you put technology into the mix, it can slow things down. It means that you don't have the same visibility on what your students understand, what they're struggling with, what they're not struggling with. So it involves a certain amount of additional forethought and additional planning, which is why we're talking about this today. So the 2 documents that I've seen lots of people have had issues downloading are useful but not essential for today's webinar. I will refer to them heavily, but I have screenshots of the parts of them that I want you to focus on, and then maybe at the end you can try again, or we can make them available in some other way that makes it a little bit simpler, just to give you an overview of what I'm talking about. So the 2 documents are things that refer to courses that I have been involved in. So one of them is an online teacher training course, and it is a set of advice that goes to teachers or trainers who are moderating a course for other teachers. And the other one is a document, again, for teachers that I advised on initially when the editorial team was putting together information to go to teachers to support them doing online communicative tasks. So before we get stuck into the online part, let's have a think about what tasks really are. So I've got a new poll for you this time, and tell me, what is a task? Is it washing the dishes? Is it buying socks? Or is it a learning activity that involves interaction to solve a problem? Could you put your answer in the poll at the bottom of the screen now? Closing the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and stop. Okay. Ooh. Fantastic stuff. 91.8% of you have chosen C. That is exactly the answer I was hoping for. Obviously, it could be seen as a task, washing the dishes, but most of us would see it as a chore, as I'm sure this boy does as well. So really what we're looking at task-wise is learning activities. We want people to learn things from doing these activities. Interaction is the biggest part of that task. It is the main reason that we do it, so that the students get a chance to communicate, to talk to one another and figure something out. And often it can be to solve a problem. It doesn't have to be, but it does add to the motivational side of things. So in the chat box on the right hand side, could you please type in what you think, what other characteristics a task has? Objectives, end result, requires involvement, absolutely, purpose, final product, yeah. Meaningfulness, lovely. Effort and thinking, yeah. Real life or authentic activity, great. Yeah, some kind of challenge, again, some kind of challenge to achieve something together. Linguistic input and feedback, and that's interesting, depends on where you want to bring that up as well. And a process, indeed. And you can also have multiple layers of this. So you have people they do one stage to achieve a certain objective, which leads into another stage, which achieves another objective. So you have a lot of different stages that can work towards whatever goal it is that you're trying to achieve, whether that's communicative, whether it's language based, whether it's skills based, whether it's raising confidence. You always have some sort of goal for yourself as a teacher, so some sort of learning objective, but also some sort of practical objective. So let's say everyone in the room is a politician and you all have to come up with a way to make healthcare available to everybody. I don't know if that's a debate anywhere, but there are various perspectives and they all have to contribute towards getting to a resolution. So there are lots of different ways that this can happen. Whether you're face to face or you're online, these things should remain constant. Critical thinking, customized content, sharing results, all of those should be universal, regardless of how you do it. So often people talk about, oh, I'm doing a forum activity, or I have to do a forum activity. So one of the things that makes this difficult for teachers is that somebody higher up, say in management perhaps, says, okay, we're going to work online and everyone has to do a forum activity every month and that's it. And there's no further kind of support or direction given. So everyone's kind of thinking, okay, well, I have to do something in a forum, which is not necessarily that helpful. A forum isn't an activity, it's just a place to do an activity. So when we talk about these kinds of tools, we're thinking about location. What kinds of places are people doing these tasks? So you've got face-to-face class and live online session like today. But obviously if we have a group of so far 93 people. I'm assuming that in your classes you'll have groups of more manageable numbers to make sure that interaction really happens, but not necessarily. You might have lots of different configurations. If you're doing something that's not in real time, you could be working on a wiki, on a forum, on a blog, Twitter, Facebook, WhatsApp. You have lots and lots of choices, and depending on your school's strategy or your personal choices, you can do activities that make sense with those tools. So we need to make sure that we're choosing the right tool for the objectives that we look at. So location, obviously meaning in the internet, where does it happen? I think it's an easier way to kind of make that equal with classroom, that kind of thing. So thinking about tasks, what kind of features would we expect? So we have maybe pair and group work, probably a role play, so you're asking people to do a particular thing, and consensus is, coming to an agreement, making something happen all together. Everyone has to put in their perspective and come to a conclusion. Language input, which may come at the beginning, may come at the end, depending on how you're planning on running your task. And maybe some research. By research, I mean maybe a piece of reading to do, maybe if you get a higher level class to read the same topic, but from two different publications, one that's in favor, one that's not in favor. So it's not quite information gap, it's more attitude gap, so that you can build in the contention and build in some sort of debate that way. So In class, which elements are most important to you? And is there anything else that you would consider important? If you could type your thoughts in the chat box, that would be great. High degree of learner interaction. Yep, and definite completion of the task. Yeah, I would definitely say consensus is crucial. Yeah, tasks are one of the interesting ways of making learning differentiated, because if you have a practical goal to your task, people can attempt it and they can still achieve the practical goal of the task even if their language isn't as strong as others in the class. So we have different ways to make sure that many people can participate, but that don't necessarily all have to be at exactly the same level all the time. So we can approach different people and provide support when they need it to make it more motivational. Okay. Interesting point about instructions. Clear instructions are really important, yes, in face-to-face as well as online. And that's one of the things that we'll talk about in terms of your task design. You need to design your instructions as well, which is super important. Okay. And just, I've seen language input come up quite a lot. Where would you put your language input? Would you put it in at the beginning or at the end? Okay. Excellent. These are the answers I was hoping for. So it depends on what you want to achieve. So obviously, if you're looking at focusing on the language first, you do that first. If you want the students to achieve the practical task and then create the need for the language and fill in the gap that they have at the end, then you move it towards the end. So great stuff. So task structure, exactly, any direction you like. So task structure for me, involves 4 different steps. So there's the preparation part, the interaction is the key, leading to a conclusion, and then the students getting some feedback at the end. So in preparation, it might be language work. So I've put a question mark because you might do it now, you might do it at the end. You need to set your goal. So your goal linguistically and your goal practically. What do you want them to actually do, as well as what do you want them to learn? The reading and topic input, maybe they, like in a web quest, they go do some reading online, they find some facts out, and then using that information, they reformulate that information in order to be able to either present it to other people or to assume their role in the task. The interaction, they carry out their conversation in character, working towards their goal. So it is the simplest bit of the whole task, but it is the most important. And if you've got all your preparation done and you know exactly what all those things are in point 1, then while they're interacting, your role can be to just be there and support and provide language or encouragement or direction as per requirements, and really respond to your students rather than thinking about, right, what comes next and what do I need to do and what are the other stages. So it's all about in the design part beforehand. And in a way, working online makes that almost easier because you are forced to do all the preparation beforehand and all of the preparing your instructions, etc. Your conclusion, obviously, they need to achieve their goal, linguistically and practically. And the feedback that you provide will be task-based. Congratulations, you decided what to do with your lottery winnings. Language-based, you used nice language of agreement and disagreement during your negotiations, and perhaps language input, expanding that into the overall generalizations that you want to make. So for me, this is a standard task. So I would work off this with my students fairly regularly. When we're working online, all the preparation happens first, and then, as I said, your role is to be there for them while they're working. So the principles then. So I would see it as 4 distinct areas, and we've mentioned some of them already, which is great. So eyes on the prize, so focusing on the objective. There's a focus on interaction. The interaction is the most important part. It's not just practice of something else, it is the center of everything that you're trying to do. It needs to be real. We had mention of real life tasks earlier on. That's definitely a huge part of the reality principle. And then planned teacher actions. So if you've got, let's say, a realistic situation would be you'd have a class of 20, but you won't just have one class of 20, you'll have 8 classes of 20. So if you're supposed to be doing a forum activity with each of your 8 classes every month, that's 8 forums every month. And you need to make sure that you are consistent with those 8 classes and that your teacher actions are consistent, that you're doing similar things, that everybody has comparable experience within what you're doing. So to go into those in a little bit more detail, eyes on the prize, focusing on objectives. And here's a poll for you guys. It's a really tough one again, okay, so think hard. Which of these is a viable objective? To use a forum, to communicate more, to use the language of the week in a written discussion, and share different cultural perspectives. You have 5 seconds. 6 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Thank you. Okay. All right. So it was a tough one, obviously. So to use a forum, not so great. And as you've all noticed, we don't want to use things just to use them. Unless that tool is bringing something special, we don't necessarily want to go there. To communicate more, yes, potentially, but you also want to you want to communicate more for a purpose. So, as lots of people were saying earlier on, it's not enough to just communicate more or to just have conversation lessons and wander in and say, hi, so how was everybody's week? Which is a very nice way to start a conversation session, but really you need much more planning and much more purpose to get real value out of that time. Then to use the language of the week in a written discussion and share different cultural perspectives is much more likely to get decent debate and different ways of using the language functionally and communicatively and achieving tasks. So you need your objectives to be a little bit more specific. So it's not quite enough to just want to communicating more, but in a specific direction. Brilliant. That's all we need. Okay, so the first of my examples from the documents you couldn't download. So this activity here is actually from a course book called Empower, and it is in Unit 6. It talks about traveling and eating around the world. So imagining that people either are in a mixed nationality class, in which case they are working together and they're living in the same place, but they've got different cultural perspectives that mean that they're thinking about things in a different way and have different experiences to bring to the table, or they're all in the same place, but they've had the opportunity to travel and might have some experiences. If not, they can hopefully use their imagination. So obviously in class, this is going to be quite good. They'll talk about food. Everybody loves food. Well, everybody in this room loves food. So hopefully everybody out there does too. And once they're done, we then have the opportunity to go online, nice and supported with documentation that we have here. So this is a tiny part of one of the documents to download, and you can look at it in the broader perspective of the full document later. But in each of the documents, the activity is linked very clearly to what is going on in the unit. So the language point, as I've highlighted here, talk about customs and social behavior around the world, compare them to that of their own nationality, using comparatives and superlatives and modals of obligation, which was exactly what happened in the unit. So there's a very, very specific communicative goal and language goal. So it's not just let's talk more about food or let's talk more about customs. It's very specifically done, and the instructions allow you to create that activity nicely. So one of the things that, again, what we want to do when we are creating our online communicative tasks is make sure that our language points are really clear and we know where we're going from the beginning. The other document they're a set of moderator notes from this course, Online Teacher Training. I've used the example of teaching with Empower for just for comparison. It begins with the objectives. What is the objective of the module, and therefore what are the objectives of the communicative activities? So these are principles that I hold dear, and hopefully, regardless of the text that you're using, regardless of the course or the curriculum, you can extract what might be useful, both linguistically, but more in a topic or functional way, what can be useful and how you can work the language into the task that you're trying to create. So really being very clear on where you're going, eyes on the prize, before you work into anything else. So then we come to the big bit, which is really the easiest bit if you've done all the other parts. So the interaction, it's the key to everything. It's the bit that you really want the students to do. So what kind of interaction do we want our learners to participate in? So we talked about this before. We want them to discuss something, negotiate. It needs to be something meaningful. They want to achieve a goal or reach consensus. This is the kind of interaction. So it sounds to me like it's not quick fire. What are you doing for dinner? There is more deep thought involved, a bit more critical thinking, and a bit more higher level than even for lower language levels, but it's a little bit more higher brain, if you like, to engage in this kind of interaction, which in order to get that done, we need to choose the right tool to facilitate that interaction. So if, for example, we want our learners to get together and create a story, for example, one of the examples that I got from Nick Peachy, his blog ages and ages ago, was to take a very, very basic story. So a girl went to a party, she lost a shoe, a prince found it, they got married. So it's a very basic version of that story, but most people will know that story, and you can ask students at various levels. If they're low levels, you can ask them to add adjectives or add names or add another short sentence to make the story more interesting. If you are looking at longer or higher levels, you can ask them to add subordinate clauses to make them more interesting. You can add different perspectives from different characters. You can ask them to do quite creative things to make the story their own. And then obviously there's lots of the kind of fairy tales that everyone would know. You can get them to change the ending, so you can change it to a tragic ending, change it to a happy ending, change it to the ending that a different character would prefer. So there are various ways that you could do that. Does anybody know which online tool would be most useful for facilitating that kind of interaction? Any ideas? A wiki? Yes, easy peasy. Yeah, so wikis are often used for collecting things. So you collect links and reviews, stuff like that. But you can actually use them quite creatively as well, and you can take it a step further. And we've dealt with that in a separate kind of document that goes in as part of the online teacher training also. So choosing the right tool. If we're looking at talking a bit more deeply, we might choose something else, but that is up to you and your objectives. Very, very important to keep that focus on your objectives. And then, of course, we want the interaction to happen. We don't want to say, everybody get online, now read this text by yourselves quietly. Not the most useful way to spend an hour together, not least because you have to get over the whole technological, am I in, am I not in, if I got the right password, am I looking at the right screen, all of that, when really you could either email them a document so they can read it first and then come in and do the conversation together. So really making sure that when you have time together that you are making the most of it, not just okay, well, we'll do 5 minutes of talking. So during that time, I'll do some grammar activities and then maybe they'll do a reading and if they can do it outside of that by themselves, then get them to do it outside and plan that journey for them. So making sure that the time you spend together is interactive time and not interactive clicking buttons, interactive with each other during that time so that you get the absolute most out of it that you can. So really, we're looking at a learning journey. Which way are we going? Are we working from language work? And if so, is it practice of the language that you did in a face-to-face class or that they did online? Is that what it mainly is? Or are we looking at interaction as the key to everything and you making sure that you've got your preparation done? Your preparation may well include language work, but the interaction for me is the biggest part of doing these online tasks. Has anybody come across the term affordances? Okay. So affordances, you can think about it from the word afford. Can I afford this? Can a tool afford something to me? So it's basically about what I am allowed to do by a particular tool. So we're going online. Do we use a wiki? Do we use a forum? Do we use an instant chat? I don't know. Do we use a live video conferencing? What would work the best? So affordances are advantages. What advantages are there of doing a discussion activity in a forum rather than a face-to-face class? And what restrictions are there when doing an activity in a forum instead of a face-to-face class? If there are more advantages, greater affordances, of doing an activity in a forum rather than face-to-face, then by all means, do the activity in the forum. If the restrictions are greater than the advantages, then leave the forum alone and do it face-to-face or do it live, whatever. So it's basically, it's a set of ways of thinking about a tool, not in terms of let's use a tool, but okay, I'd really like my students to think a little bit more deeply about this topic. Maybe let's try looking at it in a forum rather than face-to-face where there's a time limitation. Can anybody think of an advantage, or maybe two advantages, of doing a discussion activity in a forum rather than face-to-face? It's often quite easy to think of the restrictions, but can you think of any advantages? Considered responses. Thank you, Shreya. Shyer students, self-esteem, lower anxiety. Yeah. Okay. A little bit more of a focus on accuracy as well. So the shy thing is a bit controversial in that, yes, no one's looking at you, so you can take your time and construct your sentences nicely and then contribute when you're ready. But then you also have the permanence issue. So if I've set up a forum for my class, the forum is going to be available for the duration of the semester. If at the beginning of the semester my student says something silly or embarrassing or that they would rather take back, then it's stuck there. So if someone responds to it, it's not that easy to take down again. So it means that there is a permanence issue with typing something that wouldn't exist if you just said something silly in a face-to-face class. So it's something that we often quote as, oh, everyone has equal rights of participation. So in a face-to-face class, shyer students don't say much because they can't get a word in edgeways with the more confident students. But in the when you're online, everyone can get a word in, but do they really want people to read what they say lest they be criticized? So it's not impossible for shy students. It just means that we as teachers need to create the conditions such that everyone is very understanding and forgiving, and it's a little community of trust so that I don't mind if I say something ridiculous and someone points out that it was actually a mistake, and then we can work on it so that I'm able to take risks as a student. So there's a lot of emotional issues that you wouldn't think are part of what goes on. As I know, at the beginning of lots of courses, you have to introduce yourself and you have to come across as, approachable and friendly, but not ditzy and still quite intelligent, so that people will listen to your opinions and stuff. So it can be quite a delicate balance. So if those kinds of restrictions are there, then maybe avoid the forum. But if you feel that the advantages of the added time and the thinking, the critical thinking, the greater set of reflection, if that works for you, then do it. So every time you want to do for example, a forum activity, ask yourself, what does this tool allow me to do that I wouldn't be able to do without it? So greater reasoning, more time to think, etc. If that is valuable to you, then go for it. And the other question is, can I compensate for the restrictions it poses? Or are the restrictions irrelevant? So the restrictions in a forum, obviously, I can't see people. Often people reading something will take the worst possible interpretation of what you've written, not necessarily give you the benefit of the doubt. So you can find that some students don't necessarily seem to get along as well online as they do face to face. But if that's not an issue, if as Alexandra says, you've set out the etiquette and you have included take the best possible interpretation, then that's something that you can include, and it means that if that is a restriction, then it is compensated for at least slightly. So we need to definitely make sure that we take all these things into consideration when we're thinking about which tool to use for which activity. So another tiny poll. What kinds of interaction have you had so far during this session? So how have I encouraged your interaction? Okay, so we've had a few polls, we've had some answers in the chat, and I've called one person's name. I haven't actually asked them to say anything further, but I did use a name. And I had to make sure to do that before I did the poll. I very nearly forgot. So, so there are various ways that in a live online session, I can make sure that you are I can make sure that you are with me, that I'm not just talking into a void, but also this is not so much a communicative activity task type session. So when you're working together with your students, is this something that would work with your students? And if you could put it in the chat box this time, that'd be great. Yeah, connection problems are always an issue. Yeah, polling to check understanding is generally pretty helpful, but it's as simple to ask in a chat. So unless you need data, then just asking for the answers in the chat is just as simple, and also it means that everybody always knows where to go. So you might have, depending on the tool that you use for live online sessions, you might have a different set of interactional tools within that, but the simpler you keep it, the easier it is for people to follow and to get stuck in. And always having a plan B. You have anything to do with technology, you need a plan B. Okay, so you've communicated with each other, you've communicated with me, you've done it using the polls and the chat, and if you're working with your classes, it's much more manageable if you have small groups. The way that I have done this in the past is that for sessions where I wanted proper interaction, where nobody could hide behind everyone else, I've made sure that the group is no larger than 6 or 8, so quite small, but it means that I can do this on my own. So for example, today I have 3 lovely people who are here making sure that all your technical issues are as sorted as they can be, and who are making sure that I am not distracted by any of those things. When you're teaching, you don't have that. It's just you. So you're making sure that everyone can hear you and can see and can access the thing that you've asked them to download or not. But you can only really do that with very limited numbers, and your language level is limited as well. So the fewer people that you're dealing with, the better. So obviously one-to-one, not so great. You can do it, but you're not going to get the same communicative goals together as you would do. I think 6 is kind of between 6 and 10 is kind of golden number, because in that number you can say, let's say Isabel can't hear and I have to type the answers, but I know that I need to repeat things for her, or Paula has no microphone and she has to type every time, then I can manage that with a small group. With a group this size, really, it's a presentation. It's not, and it can have interactivity, but it's not like the teaching that you want to do every week, every 2 weeks. There are a lot of different things that you can manage on a small scale that you would need 3 lovely people to assist if you're doing it on a larger scale. So we mentioned reality earlier on. By this I mean a link to real life. We often talk about real life tasks, and what we want to break that down a little bit more going online, because there's a limitation and also an expansion of possibilities. So we want to make sure that the task that they're doing is relevant and what they're learning through the task is relevant to them. It needs to fit the curriculum, so your course book or your separate curriculum or your overall course goals. There needs to be a fit between what you're doing and what they're doing, otherwise they're not going to get on board. And there needs to be a sense of immediacy. So I'm doing this, but why would I do this now? Why shouldn't I just delay it until later on, the way we all tend to do? So all of these kind of combine to make something that's quite motivating. If you're asking people to do something totally irrelevant, it won't be motivating. If it's not linked directly to their learning journey, as I mentioned earlier on, then it's not going to be motivating. You're not going to get people, involved. So I don't know about you guys, but every single lesson I do looks like this. There's me on a podium, there's lights flashing, everybody's applauding. No, not really. So this is great. God, I'm not alone. Fantastic. So essentially, we've got a politician here who's potentially won an election, and everybody absolutely adores this person. Not a task that most students are going to have to do. I did used to teach at the presidency in Romania, so maybe this happened, but it didn't come up in our lessons, so that's fine. Most students are not going to need to write election victory speeches, but they may have to do something like they may have to give short talks. They may have to do long turns for IELTS exams. There are similar skills, so you might be able to sell this type of activity, but keeping in mind the language that's involved, discourse markers, talking to specific audiences, all that kind of stuff that can come up. Do I need this language? Do I need this skill? And is this task something I'm likely to replicate in my own life? So there's been lots of stuff about writing letters of complaint. That's always been part of the things we teach. Do we really write letters of complaint anymore? Some people write loads. Other people just complain on Twitter because you get a quicker response. So there are various things that we need to take into consideration within what our students are doing, what they're trying to do in their lives, what they really need English for, and how what we do fits in with that. So none of this is new to you. This is just how This is just how teaching works, and we need to make sure that we carry that awareness of relevance into the online realm as well. Curriculum fit is really, it's about how the activity links to what came before, so what my preparation was or what the language work was, and what comes after in the curriculum, in the main course, or in the assessment. They might be doing exam preparation, so sometimes it can seem a little bit disjointed when we're doing work on a particular set of language, and then you have to make sure that you get enough exam practice in during the week, so that needs to be taken into consideration as well. So always be clear with your students how that fits in. It's a huge motivational factor, making sure that it fits the curriculum, and it will also mean that you get much more engagement when you overtly focus on why they're doing this. So it's not just for fun, it's because one day you will have to do an election acceptance speech, and because you've got this test doing a long turn next week, whatever that happens to be. If you're working with portfolio, does this activity fit into my portfolio? Does it address my identified gaps? That's quite, it's quite specific. So normally we would have people working with course books. There are a lot of schools who are also going portfolio directions. Does it address my identified gaps? And if it doesn't, what would? And how do you and the student negotiate how you come up with other activities that might help? So again, in Cambridge English Empower, in the notes, this is the first of the two documents. In the activity outline, this activity follows Students' Book Lesson 6B, and it's split into 3 parts. So each activity links very closely to the course, so you don't have to come up with this yourself. So I'm just gonna have a quick drink of water. It's autumn now, and our central heating is on, which means it's very dry in the building. Anyway, so curriculum fit, super important, and be clear with your students. Tell them at the beginning, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, this is how it fits in, and it will help motivate your students to go online and get stuck in. Module fit for online teacher training, it's the same. We have basically the main part of each module is a story about a teacher who has a problem, and then how do we solve this. The main thing for being online is what we're calling a try this section or activity, where they do some reflection on an activity that they tried with their learners. And again, the text here comes from the second document, so don't worry that you can't read it. It's not as important. You can have a look at this in context later on. So a lot of people have come back to us with various, whenever people are working online, teachers want to know very quickly how an activity fits in with the module. So we've tried to provide a module structure, which is basically a table of the activities they have to do. So this is the type of activity, this is the title, this is how long we expect them to do it. But what's important is where try this comes in. So for this particular course, in the module, the activity is at the very end. So the activity is the end. So there isn't necessarily something that comes on afterwards that isn't organized or thought up by the teacher trainer, which is different from what happens in Empower, where it's completely embedded into a continuing course. So it's different, and it depends very much on how you are planning to run these activities. So immediacy is the other part. So how does this fit into what comes next in class? What's in my immediate future depends on me doing this now. So a student will go online, and I'm sure you've tried this. If you've asked students to do some language work before they come to class for their communicative activity, and they don't do the language work, and then they can't do the communicative activity. Very, very naughty. So it's very difficult for us as teachers to then incorporate people who haven't done the language work. It's all very difficult. So in this case, we're looking at the communicative bit. What in my immediate future depends on me doing this now. This might come from what follows on next in the course, and it might come from something that we as sneaky teachers work into the beginning of the following lesson or the following set of learning pathways afterwards. So where does it go? So the big blue circle is the interaction. The smaller one beforehand is preparation. What are we going to do afterwards? In Empower with the forum teachers notes, we have a wrap up. So we have an actual suggestion of what teachers can do in the following class to make sure that students know they have to kind of show up having done something and be able to engage in a small activity, just to kind of link it back into what they're doing. So always tying it in very, very tightly with what you're doing in other parts of the course. And it brings me on quite nicely to planning your teacher actions. So that little something to refer to what they did online it's really important to making sure that the students are motivated enough to go in and do that task, and to make sure that it all feels like it's part of the same learning journey. So it's not like in class we do this and online you do something that I have nothing to do with. It doesn't really work like that. Unless it's one integrated learning journey, then it is seen as being very distinct, and they know they have a separate set of motivations for when they see you and for when they don't see you. So planning your teacher actions can help you make sure that you've got something that follows up. So as part of your task, you've designed the preparation, you've designed the role play, let's say, you've set the goal. What are you going to do to feed back on that afterwards? So I realize possibly don't have huge amounts of time, but as a teacher in a class, when you've got a task going or you want to do a task, what actions would you as a teacher expect to have to take? So there's lots of bits at the beginning, during the activity, afterwards. What are you as a teacher doing? Are you in there telling them exactly what to do, or have you got other things, other ideas? Facilitating, lovely. Monitoring, definitely. Yes, setting it up. Instructions, checking, examples. Brilliant. Scaffolding and motivating. Guiding on the side. Okay, fantastic. Tell them exactly what I want done. Yeah, what is your objective? What is it that they need to do? Respond to their previous work. Okay, lots of lovely responses there. So I'm just going to pop the very short set on the side. You need to give your instructions. As I mentioned earlier on, we have potentially 8 classes with an activity in a forum, for example, to do every month. By the time when you do your first one, your instructions will be really careful, and they'll have the goal, and they'll have how to do something as well as why to do it, and what you want out of them, and what their time expectations are. The deadline will always be included. And then by the time you get to the 8th one, you're like, yeah, I'll do this. So it's not quite as bad as that, but you lose momentum as you go. So having a set of instructions that you can use, you can copy and paste and then adapt per context. So let's say you've got an exam prep class and a business class, but you want them to do more or less a similar kind of task, but it needs a little exam twist or a business twist to make it work with each of the classes. Then you have your core text, and you can just tweak it as per the audience, as appropriate for the audience. You need to set context. What are we doing this for? We need to set the goal, give them a length of time, support them as they go, nudge them, so encourage them to participate. And you need to monitor, to take notes, to provide feedback both on the task and on the language, and then you need to assess how well they did those, depending on what your assessment policy is, obviously. So there's lots of different things. Yeah, so why they have to do it, how it fits in, all of those things that we've just talked about with the curriculum fit and that kind of thing. So these are just some example actions, but when we're online, we need to plan those in. So it's not always obvious, but we do need to plan those in. So there are various points where you'll set up instructions, and your instructions will seem quite complex, but it's just because they require a bit more information. So for example, in this one, I'm not sure if you can read this, but as I mentioned from the online teacher training course, we do the teacher does an experiment, and then in a try this activity they reflect on that experiment. So I'll read it out. Let's think about your online experiment with the try this activity. Respond to this post with a short summary of what you did with your class. Say what you were trying to achieve and whether you think the experiment was successful or not, and why. Then have a look at other people's posts and see if you have anything in common. Did most people choose the same activity? Was everyone equally successful? You'll be able to read that in full in the document. But can you tell me what kinds of information are in there? What's in there that kind of replicates teacher actions? What have I put in? Okay, we've got context setting. Yep. We've got the how and the what's. Yep. Clear instruction. We have a goal. Yes. Okay. I'm asking for a response, so I'm setting what interaction I want as well. So it's what to do, how to do it, how to interact, setting goals, and there is a reason for people to interact as well. And it is definitely task-based, yes. So hopefully this will generate some decent discussion. It won't generate perfect discussion, so I will still have to be involved to prod it and make it go forward. But it's a good start. I'm going to give you another very small paragraph. I want you to tell me what it's for. What is this paragraph for? Dear all, a lot of interesting points here. Did your students behave as you hoped? What was it that made this happen? What might stop students from engaging in activities like the one you chose? Is there anything you can do to help? What is this paragraph for? Yep. It's teacher feedback that elicits even more interactions. Weaving, yeah, basically. Reflection, assessing, follow-up, feedback. Yeah. So it could be I'm trying to end the discussion, but still leave them some questions to think about. Or it could be that I am in the middle of the discussion and I'm trying to move it in different directions, maybe. So if I've planned this at the beginning, I've planned my prodding or my weaving message, then I don't have to think that creatively as the activity is going. So you can do this during your planning sessions beforehand, and then when you get into your actual task, into the actual activity, you're just responding to students. So I have a lot of questions in here, so it could end up being really splintered. So what's much more useful is if I have all these possibilities, and let's say everyone talked about how their students behaved and what it was that made this happen, but I really want to bring out the other idea of what might stop students from engaging in activities like these. So I have a set of questions that I can choose from rather than having to think one up. And anyone who's ever written an essay knows that a blank page is your worst enemy. It is if you get lots of ideas down, then you can choose the ideas that are most useful to you. So a similar principle applies in this type of thing here. So planning as much as you can ahead, and then keep them so that you can reuse them in the future. So just to recap then, eyes on the prize, focus on your objective. What is your real objective, and how is that going to affect the kind of task that you want? And looking at that same structure that we looked at earlier on as well, focusing on interaction. How can you make that as interactive as you can? How can you make sure that the time spent together is as interactive as possible? What preparation goes beforehand? Plan that. What roles need to go in? What instructions do you need to do to make sure that happens effectively? Keeping it real, to go 1990s. focusing on reality, real life tasks with real language they need and real connection to what they're doing in their learning lives as well as in their actual lives. And then planning your teacher actions as much as you can do beforehand means the freer you are to respond to your students as people during the activity. So those are my 4 main principles of designing online tasks. So that's all from me. If you want to hear from other people, there are basically 5 kind of token links there. There are some articles that you might find interesting. Also, if you put principles of creating engaging online tasks into Google, you'll find a lot of responses. Not all of them directly to do with language teaching, but a lot of them are skills based, and they're to do with solving problems, creating tasks that mean you need cooperative solutions to problems, to issues, which can be very helpful and obviously are very transferable into English language teaching, because basically we want to replicate what people do in the real world. Those things do as well. So, and now it's your turn. Are there any questions, Alistair?
So, do we have any questions for Deirdre? Not had any come in so far. I think everyone's been so engrossed in your session that they haven't they've been thinking so hard they haven't had time for any questions. We've got one in now from Rizwani Bari, who says, "How authentic are the instructor's assessments in the case of online communicative tasks?"
Well, I think you need to be quite specific about what you're assessing for a start. So when we think about, even if a student hands in an essay, if we try to correct absolutely everything in that essay, we'll be there for hours and we don't really give particularly focused feedback to the student. So same thing if you're working online, you need to be very clear about your objectives, very clear about what you can achieve with the tool that you've chosen, and assess the skills that are shown and that are showable within that. So I think if you're trying to look at people's ability to respond quickly in an instant message exchange, it's not really that realistic, and it's not something that they're going to need to do. And also the whole typing potentially on a foreign keyboard is going to slow them down something terrible. So your assessment of them is completely hampered by the technology. Whereas if you've got an ability to show critical thinking in a forum post or in a blog post, an ability of self-awareness, and to look at the language or the topic in a meaningful way, then that can be very authentic. So it as long as you're clear on your objectives and you base your assessment around those objectives, then you should be fine.
Next question from Anthony Pico, who says, "How do we convince students of the importance of participating in tasks?"
Part of that is to do with the reality aspect, the reality principle, and also the curriculum fit principle. So making sure they know how it fits within their learning journey. We're doing this because tomorrow we're going to be doing that, and you need to be able to do that before you can do the next stage, or you need to have reached a decision before you can give your presentation in class, whatever that happens to be. And also linking it potentially to portfolio, but making sure, like, one of the biggest motivators is making sure that you follow up with something afterwards. You might still have a bit of an up and down time with your first couple of tasks, but making sure that you follow up afterwards, either in face-to-face class or in the next forum or in the next live session, that refers explicitly to the thing that they did the last time, so that you noticed, that they know that you've been paying attention, that they've gotten marks for it or not, and that it is part of what is required of them all the way through. So making sure the curriculum fit is really clear beforehand, and also your retrospective actions afterwards that show that it has value and is part of your course. It's not just an added extra.
Thank you. A question from PM, who says, "Do you think that learners need to have a minimum language level to take on online activities?"
I think it depends very much on your activity and how much you're trying to achieve within the the time allotted. I would say that if you're going to attempt something online, that if you have the very fortunate situation of having your learners face to face as well, that you try the technology out first with them in the room. So obviously sorting out things like I can't log in, I can't access a file, I can't hear you, all of those things are going to be harder the lower the level the student is. So if you can sort out those things so that you can raise issues with them while you're in the room with them, it might seem like a less useful way to spend your time in class, but you can flag up those issues and sort them out before they're at home floundering on their own. So ideally, obviously, they're not absolute beginners, but if they are, then deal with that stuff in class and then take it online.
Well, thank you very much, Deirdre. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today. But don't forget that we'll be back next week, and this time on Thursday, not Tuesday, on Thursday, and 6 hours earlier than usual, when James Dean Brown and Christine Coombe will be discussing research literacy for language teachers. All in all, we've got 16 webinars scheduled for the rest of 2015, so please visit our events page to take a look at what's coming up. That's at cambridge.org/ELT events. The recording of today's webinar should be live on our blog and YouTube channel next week, and we'll send you a certificate next week too. My apologies for the delay in sending out last week's certificates. We'll be sending those out at the start of next week also. We've had a few technical problems this end of things. So thank you very much everyone for attending, and thank you particularly Deirdre for another excellent webinar. We'll look to have you back again sometime soon, I hope. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Alistair.